What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here, and we're going to be taking a look today at the data from season 0.5 of the Take the Initiative Online League, which is wrapped up soon. We are going to be moving to the tournament for the top cut of that league fairly soon. But I believe they said it's going to wait until after the content creator event that will occur, I believe, next week. So now we are going to just be looking at the results of the kind of league phase here and taking a look at what they might mean for the meta. So we're going to be looking at the different leaders here, and we're going to sort here by win rate, if I can figure out how to do that. Oh, I just did it backwards. So looking at the leaders here, the highest overall win rate was Boba Fett, and he had a 61% overall win rate. Now, interestingly, the popular Boba Green here actually only had a 62% win rate, which is let me zoom this in. This is a little zoomed out for y'all. Okay. So we're zooming this in here. 62% win rate on Boba Fett and Green, but Boba Yellow, the which was considerably less played, actually had a higher win rate at 65%. Personally, I'm inclined to think that might have been a bit of a fluke, as I do think that Boba Green is probably stronger than Boba Yellow. Boba Yellow, Boba Yellow might actually be better into aggro specifically, but it doesn't feel like it necessarily has some of the answers for other matchups, and I do think it's disadvantaged in the mirror. Boba Red also very, very strong against aggro, maybe one of the strongest decks against aggro, but not performing as well overall. Boba Green is kind of the more balanced mid-range composition and has shown itself fairly able to pivot to try to be the control against an aggro opponent and try to be the aggro against a long game opponent, and it's been doing that fairly well. We have a 62% win rate, which is very strong. So congratulations to Boba Fett for being this league's winner. Now, last league, we saw Leia and Sabine with really successful track records, these really aggressive decks. I think they were both over 60%. And I've noticed that they've really taken a back foot here. So both of them are now in the kind of 40 to 50% range, doing considerably worse than they were earlier. Um, Kind of an interesting scenario. Sabine Yellow, which was considered the strongest version of Sabine, actually has the worst win rate of any Sabine version, though the other ones were not very widely played, so it's hard to say. We did have Sabine Blue going 3-3 and Sabine Green going 3-1. I personally think Green Sabine might be a strong deck. I have some more stuff to say about that in the future, but have not been testing it super aggressively here. Leia also, basically all but one Leia game were played on Leia Red, and that achieved a 48% win rate. So still not quite even average, and definitely not the over 60% that we were seeing from the Leia and Sabine aggro decks in the last season. And I think a big reason for this is that we've seen a big shift in the meta where people have been pivoting towards running a lot more mid-range decks. So Boba Fett was by far the most played hero, actually by a huge amount the most played hero. And so most of these are playing mid-range compositions. And the second most played hero was actually Luke Skywalker. Luke Red, which I think is the stronger version of Luke Skywalker at present. I might be wrong. I'm not as hype on Luke Green, but Luke Red had a slightly over 50% win rate. Also with what I consider a strong mid-range composition. Luke Red is able to be aggressive into slower decks and is able to try and use removal and so on to control the faster decks. So I think maybe and also Luke Red was the more played relative to Luke Green, though part of this might have been because some strong cards for Luke Green were previewed towards the end of the season, and players not having seen them earlier on, if we're at the start of the season and, Alliance Dispatcher hasn't been released yet, um, Luke Green is looking worse than it is now. So part of the Luke Green stats may also be influenced by that. That's kind of an important thing with the league, at least during these periods where we're seeing preview cards come out so fast. This is not a stable meta. There are shifts all the time with new cards. Alliance Dispatcher is a big help for Green Luke. Escort Skiff is probably a big help for Green Luke. So those cards this 5-10 record is really bad, but that may include a lot of games where with some more outdated builds. Krennic also doing quite well, 56% win rate. Um, but overall, I think we saw a major shift we saw a major shift away from the aggro decks and towards these mid-range decks to counter aggro. The traditional kind of triangle that people are maybe familiar with from some other games is that aggro decks generally beat control decks generally beat mid-range decks, and mid-range decks generally beat aggro decks. Another way to put it is that you either want to be much faster than your opponent or a little bit slower and heavier. So if we think about it in those terms, aggro is much faster than some of the like late game control and ramp type builds. Um, Mid-range is a little bit above the aggro builds to counter them, and control is that little bit above the mid-range to counter that. Obviously not like ironclad rules, may not even apply that much in the game of Star Wars Unlimited as we see it become more developed. But those are just some kind of concepts to consider, in my opinion. Um, we see a high win rate for Han Solo with 57%, but there are only 7 games, so it's not necessarily that representative of where this leader's power level actually is. Krennic with a 56% win rate in 36 games. That's more respectable, and we actually did see a Krennic um, we saw a Krennic deck actually doing quite well in the end of season 0 tournament, which was just played recently. So Krennic's looking interesting, and there was a major underperformance from Grand Admiral Thrawn at a 33% win rate, at IG-88 with a dismal 14% win rate. Chewie had 20%, and Hera had 33%, though all of these last ones here, aside from Thrawn, all of those leaders I just named were played fewer than 10 times. So it's really low sample size. Jin bringing up the rear actually with a 0% win rate. Ouch. Um, if we look in terms of like not just leader but leader and color, Boba Green was the most popular deck. Luke Red was the second most. Then we have Boba Yellow. Then we have Krennic Green, and then Leia Red. So only one of these aggro decks even made the top 5 here, despite a very strong performance last season. We did see a pretty decent performance here from Vader Green at 56% win rate. My theory is that Vader Green is maybe what people are looking forward if they're trying to go to that deck that hits harder and slower than the mid-range decks and can sort of punish them. So that might be a good pick in this meta. We only had one Vader player in the season 0 final tournament. It was Thork, and he ended up kind of on the wrong side of the bracket, I think, for what he was trying to do, and got taken out by one of the few aggro players in round 2. Okay, so then these matchups. So the problem with this matchup matrix is that a lot of these matchups are very low sample size. I mean, a bunch of them are actually 0, and then you see other ones where it's like, say, it's 1. I don't actually think the win rate for Vader against Thrawn is 100%. I think that, even if you think Vader is very favored, I would be surprised if that were like let's say that Vader is incredibly favored, he almost always wins. It's like a 90% matchup. That's still very different than 100. And honestly, 90% matchups are not common. But, I think that maybe in a more relevant space, one interesting thing here is that Boba, who is the most played deck, actually didn't have any directly negative matchups, at least in these games that we saw. Vader was a 50-50. Cassian was a 50-50, interestingly. Grand Inquisitor was a 50-50. And Director Krennic was a 53%, which is relatively small. Everything else was better than that. Do I think Boba is uncounterable and has favorable or even matchups against everybody? No, I don't. I think this is small sample size, but that is something interesting to consider. Um, yeah, and then similarly, we're seeing, Leia had a 100% win rate against Darth Vader, and so that's sort of the situation where the fast decks. Oh, you know what? There's actually a little bit more on the side. Okay, yeah, no change there for Boba, but Yeah, so the fast decks tend to beat the slow decks. Vader's kind of slow. It's not that surprising to me that Leia was doing well against Vader, or that Leia was doing well against Chewie, unfortunately. Chewie seems like he would be good against aggro, but he really doesn't. Unfortunately, Chewie's actual performance against aggro has been pretty bad, unfortunately. I don't know if there's some missing tech the last few cards are going to unlock or what exactly is going on, but despite that Sentinel ability, Chewie's struggling a bit with aggro. He's kind of slow for it. Anyway, yeah, the matchups I don't think are all that useful. But yeah, I mean, that's basically where we're at in terms of the data here. So congratulations to the players who made top 16. I believe that we should have that tournament coming up. I forget when it was, but I think it's going to be not for at least another week or two in all likelihood. So, interesting, interesting situation as a whole. And I believe the winner of the first season, who was the winner of the first season here? I think they have I don't know if they actually have standings up at this point. I know Kotal was on top of the situation for a while, but this is kind of outdated information. This is not the final version because as you can see here, this is without weeks 3 and 4, and I'm not sure I have the most updated version immediately at hand. So sorry about that, guys. Um, but congratulations to Kodal did very well. I think Home from the late night gaming crew, I think might have been the number one. I'm not entirely sure. But congratulations to everybody who made the top cut in congratulations to everyone who made the top cut in season 0.5. And I think the story of this season is really just season 0, we saw an aggro meta, and season 0.5, we've seen a big pivot to a mid-range meta, kind of countering some of those aggro decks, and we'll see where the meta evolves from here. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks to you all for watching. Just wanted to give a quick update on the meta as a whole. And yeah, we'll see how things go as we move towards the full set reveal, the release of the game, the pre-release events, the other events that are going to be going on once the game comes out. Should be pretty interesting to see. And I have a feeling that things are going to change once we know more cards. We have the last leader, Emperor Palpatine, being previewed, I believe, tomorrow. And so once we have some more stuff, it'll be nice to see the differences between the final meta and what we're seeing early on. All right, guys. Thanks again for watching. This is Tower Number 9 signing off. Catch you guys later.